The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. We're going to go ahead and get started here in just a moment. You should see on your control panel an option for questions and a chat box, so feel free as we go along to type something in there if you do have any questions or need clarifications along the way. We'll try to answer those as we go, but there'll definitely be time at the end as well to address any of those, as well as time for any additional questions you might think of that we don't directly address in the presentation. So with that, we're going to go ahead and dive right into it. So welcome everybody. Thanks so much for attending. We believe that parents and guardians can play a really important role in a student's off-campus study experience. And our hope is that through this presentation, we can better prepare you for what's to come in the next few months and give you a few tools to both support and empower your students in their off-campus study experience. So just a quick overview of GoToWebinar and how that works. So this session is being recorded and we're going to post it on the ACM website under the sort of parent page in case you want to rewatch it or for those that were not able to make it during this time. Everyone who's participating right now is muted just for better sound quality so that you can hear us crystal clear on this end. As I mentioned, please feel free to use that question tab to ask any other general questions you might have or clarifications. If you have very specific questions related to a particular program, for those, feel free to send them to ocs@acm.edu. Some of those are just better handled offline. We're happy to try and get those addressed for you as well. So here's kind of a rough agenda of what we'll be going over today. So we're going to start with some introductions in just a minute here so you know whose voice this is you're hearing. We're going to talk a little bit about sort of what ACM is, a good overview of kind of the programs, how they tend to work, what you can expect for your students in those first few days. We'll talk about safety, how to prepare, and sort of different resources that are available to you as well. Oh, it looks like some people have the slides cut off, so we're going to try and fix that for you. See if we can adjust that. Thanks for letting me know. So as we're fixing that, I'll just let you know who I am. So my name is Rochelle. I'm the Assistant Director of Off-Campus Study here at ACM. And sitting next to me is Marley, who I'll let introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Marley Stein, the Senior Program Coordinator of Off-Campus Study at ACM as well. So we work with two different portfolios of programs, but we really collaborate across all the programs to help support the students. Marie works with our programs in Asia and Africa, as well as our Chicago program here in Chicago, and I work with our programs in Latin America and Europe and our Newberry Library program. So in addition to Marie and I, there are local staff and visiting faculty directors on all of our sites. So it varies depending on the program. I'll give you a brief overview of who will be working with your students on each of the sites. In Costa Rica, we have a permanent staff there. So our program director, Javier Esteleta, he's lived in the U.S. for a very long time and is really familiar with working with U.S. students and has an environmental background. Our academic coordinator, Marco Castro, who has a lot of experience with community engagement, and he'll be teaching that course and working with the students on their placements as well as their independent study project. And then lastly, Carol Flores, who is our student support services coordinator. So she'll be the on-site point person for helping with any student needs related to homestays, sickness, health, anything along those lines. In Florence, we have Rosita Siri and Jody Mariotti, who've both worked for ACM for a very long time, and they will be Jody Mariotti is our director, and she teaches the course on Renaissance, and Rosita Siri is the program coordinator. They'll also be the staff for the portion of the London Florence program, along with the visiting faculty affiliate is Joe Nizer from Grinnell College as well, teaching a course on the Florence program. In London, our spring program, we have a visiting faculty director, Amy Weldon, who will be teaching the writing course as well as overseeing the program and doing all student support services, as well as Andrew Kennedy, who is our adjunct faculty who teaches the Collecting the World in London, the Museum Studies course, and the London as a Visual Text course.
Yeah, and then we also have some other on-site staff in Tanzania. We have a visiting faculty director, Molly McNichol from Luther College. We also have Dorothy Berg, who's the director of the Chicago program. She's one of our permit staff here. And what program am I missing? I know I'm missing some others.
India.
Yes. And then in India, we also have our permanent staff there, our director, Meta Kowal, as well as some of our other support staff there, Patsy and Bravita. So you can also see their information on our main website as well. But that's just to give you a brief overview of kind of all the other people behind the scenes that are working very hard to make your students the best possible experience.
So to tell you a little bit about what ACM is, we are a consortium of 14 liberal arts colleges and have a number of affiliate colleges that also participate in our ACM programs, about 30 of them. So the 14 colleges you see below, our focus really is providing students opportunities that have personal attention on the off-campus study programs and site-based instruction. All of our programs have some component of experiential learning, be that an independent study project or an undergraduate research or community engagement opportunity. And this is really representative of the liberal arts colleges. So your students are getting an experience, the experience that they would have on campus, off-site as well, and it's a great stepping stone for them to be able to really immerse themselves in the culture there.
Yeah. And I did miss one program, which was Shanghai, so my apologies for that.
Amsterdam.
Yeah, we have Shiwei Chen, who's our visiting faculty director for Shanghai. This is actually, he's kind of special because this is his second year running the program. He's faculty at Lake Forest College.
I also forgot Amsterdam. So Amsterdam, we have a visiting faculty director, Clint Cowan from Carleton College. He has lived in the Netherlands for a long period of time, so he's really adding an added benefit to this program. And most of the program administration is run by Semester in Amsterdam at VU Amsterdam. So all of the orientation and student support services are coordinated from VU Amsterdam. So the students get a direct enroll type of experience, but with added support from their home campuses.
So we have, as you can hear, a number of different programs that we are managing and keeping track of, and they all have their own different personalities and nuances. But there are a couple of things that are pretty similar sort of across the gamut in terms of getting ready to go. And there are a couple different ways you can sort of help support your student with that. So not all programs will have visa requirements, but the ones that do typically need to be done in advance, or some might have, sort of a residence permit process that the students go through once they're there, so nothing they need to necessarily do in advance, but some still process to allow them to stay an extended period of time that might require different documentation. At this point, for all those fall programs, the students should already be pretty far along in any visa process if they have one that's required. And if you're not sure, you can always check with your son or daughter or students. There are also a number of forms that we ask students to complete. So this is part of the pre-departure process. And all of these are listed for the students in one easy place to find, which is our dedicated website to accepted students, which is acm.edu/accepted students. And these kinds of forms are things like their medical health history form, forms related to registering for classes or housing preference. They really sort of run the gamut depending on the particular program, but without doubt, all the programs do have some forms that we're asking students to do before they go. We also talk to students about their flights or transportation. Are you driving in? Are you flying in? The specific time. We ask for all that information and give the students guidelines on that. Packing suggestions are another things we do tend to provide students suggestions on. So for students that are going on domestic programs like the Newberry program or the Chicago program, that might include a list of what is or isn't included in the apartment that they would be staying in. For those on international programs, that might be more specific to the region or area or type of activity that your student is doing. We have a lot of that information all kind of centralized in one place, which is our student handbook. We have student handbooks for every single one of the programs that get updated every year that are sort of the culmination of all of this information in one place that is really the go-to guide for students. So if you're wondering about some of these details of the program and what students should bring or what to expect, talk to your student about that handbook and maybe look over it together and go through it. Some of them are quite long, but you can sort of jump through to the different areas that are most relevant to you or that you're most interested in learning about. But that is one of the places that we do keep a lot of that information central. And then the last sort of main thing we do with students to get them ready is to go through a pre-departure orientation. So we do a lot of cultural preparation through Canvas, which is the system that houses our pre-departure orientation. And these are online modules that are self-guided for the students to help prepare them for the program, give them a bit of an intercultural toolkit, because regardless of where they're going, whether it's to Chicago or Shanghai or Arusha, Tanzania, they're going to be running into different groups of people than they may have interacted before in diverse places, and we want them to be ready for that, as well as to be thinking about their independent study projects for students that are going on programs that have that as part of the program. Oh, this is going to click. So that's kind of what students are doing. In terms of what you can do and be really supporting your student in is, number one, creating a resource file. So this can be a place where you keep those important documents where in case of an emergency, you have everything in one place and have a go-to spot of the information that is going to be most helpful to the situation. So these are things like a copy of your student's passport and visa, copy of credit cards in case those are lost or stolen or turned off, and their flight information. Some other things you might want to keep on there are things like a copy of your student's insurance card, CISI. It's not actually a physical card like what your insurance card you might have in your wallet looks like. It's sent as an attachment in an email directly to the student, and they all should have received it by now. They've all been enrolled in our insurance. But the nice thing about being an attachment is you can print as many copies as you need. That's a good thing to have in the file as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about what the insurance involves in a minute here. But the last thing you might want to keep on there is any info that may assist your student in their homeschool processes for when they come back. So a lot of students are going to be registering for classes while they're abroad, or signing up for housing, or going through all of that process too. You can also help your student in terms of planning, particularly when it comes to finances and money. So thinking about how your student's going to access funds, right, on a daily basis, and setting expectations if you're the one who's financially supporting them, and creating a budget maybe in advance so that there's sort of no question in anyone's mind about what's going to be considered appropriate. You might want to investigate what sort of ATM withdrawals or cash advances or currency exchanges are available to you, or what sort of fees there may be associated with that. I can tell you now that what most students do in terms of getting money is using their regular debit card at an ATM in the location that they are, in the city or country that they are. That's usually the easiest process, but there are often some fees associated with that if it's not your home bank or if it's an international bank. So that's something you can help your student with determining now what those fees are and what's going to be the best way to sort of work within that. Some credit card and debit card do also like occur some sort of fees, like an international transaction fee, something along those lines. That's also something that you can help with looking into now. We encourage students to keep any sort of valuables or money in zipped internal pockets in their bags or backpacks or purses, whatever it may be that they have on them. But if you're trying to figure out sort of what costs may come up, we do have cost of living pages on each of the program websites to give a little bit of an idea of what students typically spend on that program, what we recommend as sort of a real baseline budget students can use, and how much cash that we encourage them to have on hand when they first arrive. It's really important that if your student is going to a place where they use a different currency, that they have some of that with them to get them through those first couple days as they're kind of getting their bearings and getting settled in, or in case something happens and they need to, buy food at the airport or take a taxi unexpectedly from the airport. It's just a really good precaution to just have a little bit of that with you on hand. And there's lots of ways you can exchange money as well. Other things that you can do to help your student in getting ready and being prepared is making a plan for communication. So we recommend setting up some sort of plan in terms of how often you might talk, the mode in which you're going to talk, because certain things may not be as accessible to your student. Their schedule is going to be a little bit different. You might be working with different time zones. So think through some of that in advance and set those expectations together kind of up front, and be aware that if your student, particularly if they're going to a foreign country, but even for domestic programs, they might not be able to let you know they've made it there right away. So it might take a little bit of time before they get settled in and get connected to, the Wi-Fi or their cell phone before they can let you know. So just be aware of that. We do send out emails once we know all the students have made it safely to parents. So if you've received the email invitation to attend this webinar, then you're already on that list, and we will try and let you know once every single student has been there that they've all made it. But just plan for a little bit of a delay before you hear from your student, and don't get too worried about that. You can also help with cultural preparation. So it might be helpful to do a bit of research on where your student is going, the host city or country, talk them through a little bit some of the inevitable culture shock that they may experience, especially if you have any background in traveling or working with diverse groups, and then adjust expectations. So while the benefits of setting off campus are really immense, we understand that the thought of your student living in another country or another city can worry even the most easygoing of parents. So it's incredibly important that you keep that in mind as well, that this is a really incredible experience for students, but they are going to have challenges. There's going to be challenges for the students, probably for you as well, having them at a distance. But it's through those challenges that we often experience the most growth. So we just ask you to support your student through those challenges and understand that that's a really vital part of the experience, is that they are put out of their comfort zone and challenged in some way.
So to build a little bit about communication with your student, Marie mentioned that it's best to set up a plan for how often you will communicate with them and via what platform. And this is just easier so that the student and you both aren't worrying about getting in contact. It provides the student the independence to explore the city or the country that they're living in, but also allows them to update you on anything that might be going on in their day-to-day. All students will have a local phone, so they will be able to contact each other, the program director and staff, us, so we have a couple of options that they can do, but we recommend the easiest option is for them to bring their unlocked US phone and switch out the SIM card. They do not have to navigate this on their own. Our on-site staff will help them go to the phone store, get a SIM card, if they need to purchase a local phone for whatever reason, one that might not have via smartphone, that's also an option. Getting a U.S. phone with international coverage, some students do opt to do. However, it is far less reliable and a lot more expensive. So we highly encourage them to get a local phone number. This also helps them communicate with any locals that they might need as well. While we can't force students to purchase/have a working phone, we highly encourage it, and it is a necessity for safety benefits. So on all of our sites, we also set up an emergency phone tree and collect their contact information after they get a working cell phone. And so it's really important that the students we express this to them many times, but that they have a charged phone at all times and that they make sure they recharge it with money each month or each week as they use it. There's a couple of other free applications that the students use to communicate with each other, but also back home internationally. And this allows them to spend less money on their phone coverage and make sure that they're able to be contacted in the event of an emergency or for whatever other purpose. Students most likely use WhatsApp, which is a texting app, but they also have capabilities for video and phone. That usually works better when they are connected to Wi-Fi, but the texting is available via data at any time of the day. I think it's 99 cents for you to download, and it is one of the most commonly used international texting applications. All housing has access to the internet, in some sites it's a little bit less
stable a connection.
Yes, it's less stable of a connection, but there are opportunities for the students to go to the school where they're studying or the university, cafes and restaurants for Wi-Fi. So please keep in mind if they are going to a site that has less connectability, maybe in the rural location in Costa Rica or Tanzania, just be in mind that there might be some lag, but there is Wi-Fi in all of the homes. Yeah. Another thing to note is FaceTime is an option if students have iPhones. Skype is really good. Google Voice, if you download it in the U.S. before you go, it allows you to call landlines. So that might be helpful if they need to call their credit card or to an office line or something like that. One thing we really want to emphasize is that we really want you to be a part of your students' off-campus experience, but allow them the space to grow and learn on their own by not communicating too frequently, because that can be distracting for an immersion experience. So but you know your student the best, so talk to them about what they want while studying off campus. So just to tell you a little bit more about how we're preparing our students, we send periodic communications every 20 days before the start of the program with important reminders. Encourage your students to check their university email as the email we're using. To get all of that information and just make sure that they have a pulse on what is going on as far as document submission. By this point, most of the sites have everything submitted, so we're just processing it right now and making sure there's no errors or anything additional that the students need to provide us. We also send an arrival email about 14 days before the start of the program, so this includes information about how to get to their homestay or their apartment or arrival from the airport to where they're going. It'll include the address. We don't usually post it in the student handbooks just so it's for safety reasons. So that email will have that information and a couple of options for getting to the location that they need. Once all the students have arrived on site safely, Marie mentioned we would send them an email. We would send all of you an email, but we will also send the students an email just welcoming them to the site. They will have, in addition to pre-departure orientation that they've all completed via Canvas that talks about resiliency, goal setting, cultural immersion, there is also an additional on-site orientation, which is an orientation to their host location, as well as identifying the resources and opportunities that they will be able to take advantage of on-site. So one last thing before Marie goes into health and safety. Off-campus study comes with a lot of ambiguity, change, and new experiences. So really try to help your students navigate that sense of ambiguity with a flexible outlook. While the experience is really a positive one, it does take time to adjust to these changes, and there will be ups and downs as they go through that, especially in the first few days on site.
Yeah, and someone did have a good question about if students are going to be met at the airport, if they're expected to sort of get on location on their own. And it depends a little bit on the program. Most of the international locations, we do meet students at the airport, provided that they follow our suggestions for timing. There's usually a specific window of time in which we can reasonably get them at the airport. So as long as they're paying attention to that and meeting those sort of requirements, then typically we do pick up students at the airport. But where we don't, there's usually good reason for that, because it's a very easy place for them to navigate. For example, in Chicago, if a student is flying in, we expect them to find their own way within Chicago, but we do give them directions on public transit and what to use and the best way to go about that. So now we're going to shift a little bit into safety. So there are three main concerns that come up with off-campus study. So I want you to be assured that the odds of a safe and incident-free experience are definitely in your favor, regardless of the destination that your student is going to. But that's not to say that off-campus study isn't without risks. Just like living anywhere, there is some risk anywhere in the world or in the U.S. that you might live. So the three main concerns are pretty much the same regardless of location, and those are petty theft, alcohol, particularly as it relates to over-consuming, or students just making themselves more vulnerable by not managing their consumption appropriately, and traffic. So being in new traffic patterns, people operating motorized vehicles, things along those lines. Those tend to be sort of the crux of the majority of incidents that do happen are around one of those three areas. And there's a lot of different ways to sort of manage risk. We do talk to the students pretty extensively about these things and a whole host of other things in the pre-departure orientation, as well as location-specific safety concerns that might come up. But the best way to reduce risk is really just adding an increased awareness with some simple common sense. Both Mahler and I have lived and traveled pretty extensively abroad and can attest that although it may seem really simple, the best way for anyone to reduce their risk when traveling is just practicing increased awareness and common sense. So this boils down to understanding the culture of where you are, being alert of the surroundings. And a couple ways that you can do this are things like blending in as much as possible by being aware of the local dress and mannerisms, walking like you know where you're going, keeping valuables out of sight, or better yet, at home altogether, traveling together with peers, using extra caution at night, and following country-specific guidelines that we will give the students in pre-departure as well as on-site during their orientation. And on this page, I also listed just a couple of good resources related to safety that we definitely direct the students to, but you might want to look at as well. So one is the CDC.gov, that's the Center for Disease Control. That's a good one if you're wondering about what sort of vaccines might be recommended for the location your student is going. Travel.state.gov, that's the U.S. State Department's website where you can find all sorts of travel alerts. They have good profiles on country backgrounds. That's really helpful. And then STEP, which is the Safe Traveler Enrollment Program, is something that we require all of the students to enroll in. And that's the State Department's list of sort of registering your travel so that if something happens in country, they know you're there. It's also the way that students can get sort of specific alerts from the local consulate where they are too. So in terms of managing emergencies and what we do, we are as proactive as we can be whenever possible. So having students register with STEP is one of those ways that we do that. We have a 24/7 emergency phone that sort of rotates between me and Marley and one other member of our office, that the students all have that number in case they run into any sort of issues. They'll also have the number of sort of the local on-site go-to person as well for once they're there. We do a lot of regular monitoring of all of the host locations where the students are. We get a lot of different information, some of it which is not publicly available typically on these locations where the students are going to be, just to make sure that we're on top of any issues that may come up. And then we do a lot of training as well on emergency procedures with our staff and the visiting faculty that are going to these locations as well. So we take a lot of care in that. If something does come up in case of some real emergency, like a natural disaster, political unrest, something along those lines, we work with the on-site program staff, local authorities, and CISI, which is our international insurance plan, to implement whatever the most appropriate action plan is going to be for that particular situation. So it may be comforting for you to know that all programs do have a site-specific procedure and plan. So as Marley mentioned, phone trees, we set emergency meeting points. Each director creates a plan too where they're identifying local healthcare options, things along those lines. We have guidelines and procedures communicated to the students during orientation about what to do in case of emergency. If the situation calls for it, we will also reach out to the student's emergency contact, which may very well be you in case of a true emergency. And the on-site staff are really meant to be the student's first point of contact, and then they can reach out to us as well if something comes out. But in special cases, if you need to contact us about something that's going on with your student, you can do that, but we really prefer for the student to seek help or care and attention whenever it's possible from the local staff there, as they are really in the best position to go into action quickly in case of an emergency. Okay, so in terms of more health-specific things in that insurance plan I've mentioned, I can talk to you a little bit about kind of what that looks like. So we encourage students to continue whatever their normal health practice is. So if they take medication, they should continue taking that medication while they're abroad. If they exercise regularly, they should continue doing that while they're abroad or off campus in Chicago, wherever they may be. If they require 10 hours of sleep, get 10 hours of sleep. It sounds pretty simple, but this can make a really big difference. And your student knows what's going to, help them stay healthy. But you can encourage them to be aware of those needs and make sure that they're really paying attention to their body. So off-campus study is a new experience in which they'll find themselves in a new and exciting but potentially stressful situation. So it's important that they maintain their normal health routines to keep in good, healthy spirits. As I mentioned, we encourage students to bring all their prescription medication with them, as well as a copy of that prescription in case they get questioned about it, or in case something happens and they do need to try and find a way to fill that in country. Please keep in mind that you are not able to mail any kind of medical prescriptions to your students, so they need to bring the full supply that they'll need with them, or in the case of the students studying in Chicago, have a way that they can get that filled at a U.S. pharmacy here in Chicago. ACM can't give specific recommendations of what vaccines or medical preparations might be needed for a country, but we encourage you to consult with a medical professional on what sort of shots or vaccines may be recommended. You can use the CDC website as a good guideline for that. You can also go to a travel clinic that might specialize in that. That's what I tend to do when I'm going to countries where I know I'm going to need more than one shot covered. But we also have the students all submit a medical history form. So almost all the students have done that at this point. And what we do with those is we compile the information. If there's anything on there that warrants maybe further conversation or clarification, I set up one-on-one calls with the students in order to facilitate that, to make sure that if there's anything we need to be doing to best support that student, we can have that set up, and to make sure that the student is sort of on the right page in terms of what preparation they may need to do. And for things like allergies or more serious conditions, we share that information with our on-site staff on a need-to-know basis, so that they as well are prepared to best manage any concerns that may come up. With CISI, it's a specific kind of insurance. It's not meant to replace your regular insurance. It's a supplemental international insurance. The reason we require it is because it covers a lot of things that you wouldn't normally need in the U.S. and that your typical domestic plan doesn't have. So these are things like emergency evacuation, and reparation remains, and medical reunion, all these things that are just not high need, except for in these situations where students are more out of reach. So we enroll all of the students that are going on international programs in CISI. For students that are studying in Chicago, their domestic plan is typically just fine. So we have students stay with that level of coverage. What CISI doesn't cover, though, are things like certain kinds of conditions, really extreme activities like parasailing or operating a motorized vehicle, which the students are prohibited from doing. But if they do happen to do something like that or pilot a plane, some of those things are not covered. It doesn't cover personal property. It's not a travel insurance for lost luggage or anything like that. It's really intended for medical emergencies or other emergencies that may require evacuation from the country.
It also makes getting and paying for treatment, if it's, something even simple like a stomach ache, much more simple, and that the students are able to get the help they need quicker and at locations that will be able to serve their needs.
Yeah, and it's one thing that is a little bit different about it than for what most people in the U.S. are used to is it's a pay and claim policy. So that means that in a lot of cases when the student goes to use the insurance, they are paying for that service up front and then filing a claim through CISI to be reimbursed for that. In some cases where we have notice, and we're able to make arrangements, CISI can set up a direct billing with a clinic or physician, especially if it's something that's going to require sort of more continuous care. We will do that, but in most cases, it's a pay and claim policy. So this is really just an extension of kind of the existing coverage your student would have now.
And they're very quick at resolving the claims. So as long as your student is on top of filling out the form, and we usually send it along to them and we have that on hand and they have access to it on their own, CISI can resolve the payment pretty quickly.
Yep. And you can read more about the policy too if you'd like online.
Oh. So we go over a lot of these concepts with the students in the on-site or in the pre-departure orientation on Canvas, but I'm just going to give you a brief overview, just letting you know that your student might go through various ups and downs, both emotionally and intellectually, as they're exploring themselves and in this new environment. There's a couple of different models out there in the field right now, but the main point is that students go through different stages, both highs and lows throughout the semester and at different points. Some students might not have any of these reactions, but others might have them exactly how they're shown here. So another example. So one thing that usually happens for students is at the beginning, everything's really exciting, everything's really new, everything's great. They have a very tourist-like approach to their host country. And then after a couple of weeks or a few days, they might feel a little bit homesick or start to not feel comfortable with the different culture since it is something new to them. But then after some time, they settle into a routine, they become more comfortable with the people and the experiences around them, and they begin to adjust. So during this adjusting period, students often might have some miscommunications or a cultural bump. And a cultural bump occurs when two or more people enter a situation with different expectations about a behavior. This can be caused by different communication styles, behaviors involving things, very everyday things such as the use of time, space or speaking, physical objects such as clothing or artifacts, or even the architecture or decor of a location. Proxemics and formality differences can also cause a culture bump. So in certain cultures, language, the type of formal language is different than with different people than it might be in the U.S. The one thing to notice or to be aware of is that your student's going to talk to you about these type of culture bumps and these miscommunications that they might have with the host country natives or with the staff. So we encourage them, if they do encounter one of these situations, to talk to their homestay families, talk to their peers, because they likely are experiencing similar situations, and talk to the staff and faculty on site, because they are trained and very familiar with these type of growth and learning opportunities. And Marie and I are also happy to speak with students to help them unpack those situations. But as their parents and guardians, they're going to probably come to you first. So these cultural bumps can go one of two ways. It can be an opportunity for students to be reflective and learn from it about a new culture, but it can also result in making generalizations or jumping to a stereotype. And we really don't want that to happen, because that's not usually the goal of these type of experiences. And that can be reduced by self-reflection and analysis and communication with the parties involved. So if it is between the student and maybe a host brother, to talk about what it was. And also the local staff and faculty and the research advisors, or the locals that are interacting with the students, they're really familiar with working with both ACM students and US students in general, and they're used to having these conversations surrounding cultural misconceptions. But as they talk to you, encourage them to keep an open mind and be positive, and think about the larger picture at hand. Cultural learning occurs as a result of reflecting on these miscommunications, so having your guidance for them to be open and flexible will help them get the most out of this experience.
And sometimes these bumps are small things, like, you might go to Chicago and order a hot dog with ketchup and be given a very hard time. And that can be a bit abrasive for a student, and maybe that's a small thing, but even something like that, right, can be kind of abrasive if you're not expecting it. And we see sort of little situations like this that can be sort of maybe less significant incidents like that to more significant things that may affect students in different ways. And if it's hitting them at a point where they're kind of maybe having a little bit of a rough day adjusting to begin with, it can feel much more traumatic than it is if they're already at sort of a low point. But these sort of bumps exist really in different cultures in really the broadest sense. So even within a place like Chicago that is really diverse in terms of race and ethnicity and background, and even the different neighborhoods can have very much sort of their own identity, we still see students going through this, and maybe it's harder for them sometimes to identify that this is what's happening, whereas you expect it maybe in a more international setting. So just keep that in mind as well, especially if you have a student on a domestic program. They too go through a lot of this as well.
Yeah, and this can be things that are related to customs, or they can be things that are related to the student's identity. So having them think about those as separate experiences will also be helpful. So an example of this is in Dutch culture, they're very punctual, very responsive, and very direct. And sometimes students are not used to having that expectation of them, and that can cause some miscommunication. So they get a lot of this orientation up front when they arrive, but having them understand that it's not that the Dutch are angry at them, but that's just the expectation that they're operating in. Or things such as students not wearing slippers in the homestay family. It's a very simple difference of custom, but it can cause a cultural bump and a misconception. Or it can be something along the lines of how their identity is different in the given culture or location that they're studying. Just to give you an idea of the types of areas that students will be talking to you about, this is a very common example of what the different levels of culture are. So culture can be things that are on the surface: food, dress, music, crafts, language, things we see every day. But it can also be things that are not present to the naked eye, and that those are going to be most likely where the cultural bumps will occur. So this can be ideals of child rearing are different if they're in a homestay family with young children, the nature of friendships, nonverbal communication, body language, attitudes towards mental health, Gender is a very common one that students reflect on and is very different than what we might be used to in the US. So this is just a general idea for you to take some notes and about topics that your students might be bringing up to you, and just have them reach out to their resources and to be open and reflective. So along those lines of how you can support, a few, I'd say 5 quick ways to do that best for your students. Positivity and care. A student's success abroad depends on a student's ability to effectively adapt to local culture, which is not always easy, but a big part of their growth. Being the same consistent support for them is the best way. You could probably support them. Encourage your student to reflect and praise positive changes or growth that you notice in the student. So reinforcing when they are making those strides towards improving their intercultural skills. This is a really common one, venting versus processing. I know myself and everybody, we always vent to the people that are closest to us. So really try to have them take it a step further from just venting or complaining about what might be going on, but also processing what they're seeing and taking more of a solution-driven approach to the types of experiences they're having. It's completely normal and expected for anyone to go who's studying off campus to go through culture shock and have low points. So that is normal, and don't be alarmed if your student is talking about that. But if it is occurring for a very extended period of time, please let us know and encourage your student to let the staff know, because that might be a situation where we'll need to provide added support. Encourage students. We want them to take advantage of all the opportunities and immerse themselves in the local culture. So we share opportunities going on in the city and the community that they're living in, but also encourage them to take that active role themselves to seek out opportunities that might not be shared with them via the program staff. This is a similar experience to when they're first starting college, so have them go into it with that same type of mindset. And then lastly, practical and sentimental gifts. Their students might, this goes both ways. So having them bring something with them that reminds them of home is really helpful for those moments when they might be a little bit homesick and they want to remember their home culture. But also it's a great opportunity for them to share something with locals that they're meeting on site. So if they are doing a homestay family, we recommend that they bring a small gift, something that is representative of their university, their city. This could be a mug or a calendar or something related to the sports team or local city. Or a family photo is another option that they could, not as a gift, but an opportunity for them to connect with others in their host culture.
Beautiful. So we've covered a lot of information in a very short period of time. So just want to let you know some additional resources that are available to you if you want to dive into any of this a little bit more. So as we mentioned at the start, we're going to put this recording on the sort of parent resource page that we have, and that link is right here on the screen. On that website, we also have a parent handbook, as well as sort of different suggestions on that page of other resources we'll link to, or things that might be helpful for you to be aware of. Some of it, things that we've already talked about today, but there's lots of good information on there, links to some of our more detailed policies and procedures if you're interested in that, and occasionally some important reminders will be on there as well. Excuse me. We also have mentioned the student handbook. So this is really where we keep a lot of the program specific information related to academics, programming itself, the housing, the structure, packing, all of that sort of information tends to be there. So that's something that you could look into as a resource as well. All of that has been shared with your students. So that's maybe an activity you could do together to go through that. We also have just our general phone numbers for our office here in Chicago. You're welcome to give us a call if you have any pressing concerns. And then the emergency number is there in case of true emergencies where for some reason your student is not able to contact us directly and you need to do that on their behalf. You can call that emergency number. But please only call it an emergency because it will wake us up if it's late. This is our contact information, and here are sort of the different programs that we tend to specialize in more. So you're welcome to reach out to either me or Marley if your student is going on one of these programs and you have more specific questions related to that. I would encourage you to first talk to your student and really allow them to own their experience and really empower them to be the source of information on the program they're going on, to just sort of reinforce that sort of independence and responsibility that they're taking on by going into these experiences. But if it's something your son or daughter can't answer, or you'd like to jointly talk to us about, we are happy to entertain those kinds of questions as well as they come up.
Marie also works with India, and I work with London, Florence. So I think they just got cut off on the slide, just for your reference.
Yeah. So now we're going to open it up for any questions that you might have. So if there's something we talked about that you want a little more clarification on, or need a little more detail on, feel free to ask those now. If there's something we didn't talk about you were wondering about, you're welcome to ask that at this point too. We'll do our best to try and answer a few of those questions. I know one of the questions that was submitted leading up to the registration of this was around money and exchanging money. And I guess I can just give you a couple of ideas of ways and places to do that. If you happen to have a AAA membership, they will do currency exchange. Sometimes you have to call in advance to get whatever currency you're looking for. If you live near an urban environment, I mean, most major metropolitan areas have some sort of currency exchange. And here again, even if it's not a super common currency, they can usually order it. I know the one that I like to use in Chicago can get me pretty much any currency in the world within 2 days. So that's a good option. Or sometimes your bank, if they're a large enough bank, may potentially be able to help you with getting some of that currency in advance. Or as sort of a last option is, of course, the airport. I would hesitate to do that if you have a better option available to you, simply because the airport's going to have like a higher exchange rate than what you might find outside of the airport. Just sort of that additional convenience fee.
Yeah, and also to address the airport pickup, I can just run through my programs and let you know what that is. So Amsterdam and Costa Rica is airport pickup. Amsterdam is only if the student actually submitted their flight information to me in time and arrived before 1 p.m. Otherwise, there is a direct shuttle to where they're to the city center and not far from where their housing is. Florence and London, Florence, the students are required to get to either their housing or the hotel where they'll be staying the first few days on site for Florence on their own, but we give them detailed instructions on how to do that, or they can always take a taxi as well. Newberry, the students are also on their own for arriving to the Gold Coast of Chicago, but we give them instructions as well via public transportation or the taxi option.
Yeah, and then for the Chicago program, the students here, if they are flying in, where they're staying is really well connected via public transit to the airport. So we provide students information on that. Or they can take a taxi. A lot of students will drive in that day too. That's fine. In the case of Jordan, students are typically picked up at the airport if they submitted their information. For Shanghai, similarly, there's a window of time in which when the students arrive, that we can have them picked up at the airport. If they're arriving outside of that time, for whatever reason, then they can take a taxi fairly easily to campus. And then for Tanzania, I think I have all the students' flight information for that, so they're all being picked up at the airport when they arrive as well.
Yeah.
And then for India as well, we do some airport pickups too for students. As long as they're giving us their flight information sort of in the reasonable amount of time that we ask them, we're able to make those arrangements for them in advance.
And there'll be someone either at their homestay, the hotel, the university to greet them when they arrive at all the sites.
Yeah. Somebody asked if the slides are going to be available, so you can access them through the recorded version of this, which will be posted on our website later this week. If you just want the slides themselves, you're welcome to email us at ocs@acm.edu, and I'm happy to send those to you as an attachment if you would prefer. So I think with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you so much for attending. We really appreciate sort of the care and attention that you're giving to your student and the acknowledgement of what a substantial sort of experience this can be for your student's life, and so happy to see so many people really supporting their students in these experiences. So once again, we're happy to help if anything else comes up. Otherwise, we wish you a great rest of the summer and a fantastic time for your student wherever they may be in the world.